Good morning, Sedona. It is Saturday, August 3rd, 2024, and at 10 a.m. each week, you know it's time for Sedona Life with Stephen Hanks, Red Rock Country's radio magazine. We're coming to you from the beautifully overhauled KAZM Mellow Mountain Radio studio in West Sedona on 106.5 FM and 780 AM. And we also live stream this show on mellowmountainradio.com. So, folks, this, as you know, is a radio show that each week explores all the fascinating aspects of life in Sedona and the Verde Valley and the area's intriguing personalities. And our shows are also transformed magically into podcasts, which can be heard on Apple and Amazon Podcasts, YouTube, and Spotify. Now, all of our Sedona Life with Stephen Hanks shows in August are being sponsored by the Sedona Heritage Museum, where you can explore the unique history of Sedona and Red Rock Country. The Sedona Heritage Museum is located on Jordan Historical Park, 735 Jordan Road in Uptown Sedona, and it's open daily from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. For more information, call 928-282-7038. That's 928-282-7038, or visit sedonamuseum.org. And speaking of the Sedona Heritage Museum, our theme for today's show just happens to be Sedona's storied history. And we're going to explore that with my special in-studio guest to educate us about that and more with Nate Meyers, the Executive Director of the Sedona Heritage Museum. Now, usually, this is the point of the show where I present Stephen's Sedona Scene, which highlights a few upcoming events around Sedona and the Verde Valley. But since things are a little bit slower around town during the summer, I've decided to dispense with that segment this week and get right into talking with my special guest. So, Nate Meyers is a native of upstate New York and graduated from the State University of New York College at Geneseo. Is it Geneseo, right? Geneseo. I should know that, being a CUNY grad. You know, my school played games against those schools, but it's been a long time. I'm old now.
I'll give you a pass on it.
Okay. He had degrees in history and trumpet performance and holds a master's degree in museum anthropology from Arizona State University. Very cool. These days, Nate is the executive director of the Sedona Historical Society and the Sedona Heritage Museum and has led the organization for the past 2 years.
Yep, just about 2 years.
Prior to arriving in Sedona, Nate was the curator at the Chandler Museum in the Phoenix metro area for nearly 18 years, and he doesn't look old enough to be working anywhere that long. He's a lot like me in that way. Both look young for our age. All told, he has worked for about 20 years to preserve, document, and share local history across Arizona. He served for over a decade on the National Small Museums Committee of the American Association for State and Local History. And in addition to his work with that group, he has served on boards and committees with the Museum Association of Arizona, Western Museums Association, and the American Alliance of Museums. He currently serves as the chairman of the City of Sedona Historical Preservation Commission. What a resume. Nate, welcome to Sedona Life with Stephen Hanks.
Thanks. Good to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
It's great having you. So, you're obviously into history and museums, but being the music lover that I am, what's this deal with having a degree in trumpet performance?
You know what it is? I was actually inspired when I was in fourth grade and they say you need to pick an instrument or sing or whatever. And I remembered my cousin, who's several years older than me, playing trumpet. And I was like, that would be kind of cool. And picked it up and just really enjoyed it and got a lot of great memories and experiences performing with professional musicians, performing in drum and bugle corps for years, winning a few world championships doing that,
wow.
Which is kind of neat. It's kind of unique. So it's been really wonderful.
So when I was growing up, I had a younger brother about a year and a half younger than me who fell in love with the trumpet like around, I guess it was sort of the late 60s. And at that point, the big trumpet star in pop music was Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, were you into them, or who were your favorite trumpet players?
Oh, Wynton Marsalis.
Yeah,
of course, yeah. And I got a chance to play with him once, and he gave me
the compliment of with Wynton Marsalis?
Yeah, and he gave me the compliment of a lifetime for a trumpet player. He's like, "You got some good chops, man."
Unbelievable.
Okay.
that I mean, I think we're not going to talk about the museum now. We're going to talk about
we'll just stick to music. Yeah.
Wynton Marsalis, that's pretty impressive.
Love Wynton.
He's great. So you're more into jazz trumpeting?
Yeah.
That would make sense. So, well, that's a great thing to have on your resume.
Yeah.
Do you ever play now?
Oh no, I need to get back to it. I've got my horn still, and I'm always like, I need to play. My wife's a musician. She's a choral director, and she runs a music studio. And a few times she's had songs that have trumpet accompaniment with them.
Nice.
Not often in choir music,
right.
but so I've played a couple times with her.
That's awesome. So don't make the trumpet a museum piece. You got to play it.
Got to play it. Yeah, that's right. That's good advice.
So, all right. So now we'll segue into what we're here to talk about, really.
If we must.
Yeah. We could do sports for another half hour. So when did your passion for history begin, and your interest in working specifically with small museums over time?
Yeah, well, I grew up in upstate New York, which has a lot of important local, regional, national history. You know, mm-hmm. I grew up not far from the Erie Canal, learning the history of that. You know, in the heart of some of the biggest events in the Revolutionary War. You know, when the British tried to chop the colonies in half by invading New York State and.
Yeah, if you watch the movie 1776, Washington's always sending messages about mm-hmm. what's going on in upstate New York during the war.
Yeah, and you know, the family genealogy was always interesting to me. My great grandfather had traced our genealogy back to the first voyage of the Mayflower, which is a really cool bit of history, and so it was just kind of something that was always around me and a part of me. And our family vacations were not to Disney World and the beach and that kind of stuff. It was Gettysburg and Colonial Williamsburg and Boston for the Freedom Trail and that kind of thing. So awesome. I just kind of grew up with it and fell in love with it naturally that way.
Yeah, that's great. So and what's about the deal with the small museums specifically? Like, why did you gravitate toward working with them?
Mm-hmm. I mean, it wasn't intentional in the outset. I graduated from college, was looking for work and trying to figure out what I was going to do with a history degree. And actually, a couple of my friends had volunteered at our hometown museum in Cottage Lawn in Madison County Historical Society in Oneida, New York, and I was like, well, they said they enjoyed volunteering there. Maybe I should look at museums. That seems natural. And there's an opening at the Chandler Museum that I got, and the rest was kind of history, and so to speak. But you know, I really enjoy working in small museums because I like being able to make an impact. You know, it would seem, and I actually thought this when I started, that, you know, the dream's to end up at a huge museum like the Smithsonian or right. something, right? And I've talked to people who work at the Smithsonian. They're like, "Oh God, it's soul crushing. It's you're a cog in the machine. You have one job, and that's what you get to do." Whereas in a small museum, you know, you got to do a little bit of everything, mm-hmm. and so you really have a chance to make a major impact and really connect with the community too in a really exciting way, a really interesting way.
Yeah, you know, I totally identify with that. Being my career was spent in magazine publishing, and most of the magazines I worked on were small niche publications, mm-hmm. which didn't have big staffs. And I was able to, like you were saying, sink my teeth into all the areas, mm-hmm. not only as an editor and a writer, but advertising, sales. And you kind of, when you're in one of those jobs, you oversee everything when you're running it. So what was the evolution to get to being an executive director? Obviously, you had did you curate for a while on a staff, or how did your progression work?
Yeah. where I started, we had a small staff, and my main job was collections,
which has to be fun.
Yeah, I mean, you're getting your hands on the real
right.
pieces of history, right? To me, that's the coolest part of a museum.
There's a lot of archaeology involved in that, in a way, right?
Yeah, there's some archaeology. Yeah, you definitely have to know some of the basics, and that's one of the things I've really enjoyed too. Is like I have to learn a lot about a lot of different topics, right? And there's times where I'll throw out a piece of trivia or a little tidbit of knowledge or something, and my wife will be like, "Why do you know that?" I'm like, "It's literally my job to know these things."
It's like me knowing like obscure baseball statistics,
right?
Like
yeah,
they just flow. Right?
Exactly. You connect with it, and it latches on, and yep. But no, starting there in collections was really, really pretty neat, and then being in small museums, you learn you can't be siloed. You can't just stick to, okay, I'm the collections guy, that's all I'm going to do. Oh, right. No, that you're working with the education staff to give them history and stories and help them develop educational programs. You're working with the exhibition team, and you're part of the exhibition team to say, okay, here's a story that this artifact can tell. Here's how we can get this message across using these archival items, and really, I've always really liked research too, and so being able to dive in and say, here's a question, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. I'm really going to dig in and not stop until we really get the answer here.
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier in the show, I do this segment each week called Steve in Sedona Scene. And last Saturday, I talked about the free community days at the museum that every Thursday through August. Tell us a bit about that and what people can get out of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a great initiative we started last month. So through the summer, July and August, offering free admission to local residents so that they get to experience and enjoy the museum free of cost. And we define the local audience as being Verde Valley wide. So just come on in, tell us you live in the Verde Valley, and get free admission.
That's all you have to do.
Yep.
That's a great program, especially in the summer.
Yeah, we're just trying to make it easy for people to come and visit the museum and really learn something about their community. Whether you've been here 50 years, whether you've been here 50 days because you just moved in, this is your community, and to me, what makes any community unique is its history. How did it get to be the community it is today, and being able to help Sedona residents and Verde Valley residents understand that is really exciting.
Especially a place like Sedona, because even though it's a small population, relative to other cities in Arizona, it has to be fascinating learning about the history, not only the geology of the Red Rocks, but how a city just came out of nothing like this within this area has fascinating stuff, at least to me. I mean, I think it's anybody who visits here must feel that way. So what's your favorite part about the history of Sedona? What do you find like most fascinating and like to talk about?
Yeah, there's a lot to it. And that's been a really fun part of the last couple of years, really getting to know the history of this place and digging into it. The Red Rocks are a small part of it, but the impact that the Red Rocks had on people's lives and that kind of thing is really interesting. We've been digging into recently, like the mining history of the area, and of course people are going to try to mine, but the Red Rocks are, not really. They're not really hiding much, but one of the things that's been really fun is to try to get people to look at Sedona's history a little bit differently. So people have come and have heard stories of Sedona Schnebley, the namesake of the town, and it's because her husband was the postmaster and he needed to name the place, right? Okay, that's it's a good story.
Yeah.
But, when you know something about Sedona herself, it becomes a much better story. In Sedona, is it okay to launch into some stories here? Or?
Oh yeah.
Okay,
sure.
Good. I didn't know.
I mean, I'm going to ask you about the Helen Jordan exhip. So,
yes, love to talk about that.
Yeah.
And some other upcoming programs and events. But, but Sedona herself is really interesting because her father really did not approve of her marrying T.C. Schneble. And she said, I'm going to do it anyway. And he said, I'm going to disown you. And she went and did it anyway and this is the 1880s.
Do you know what the reason he was
religion
against was? Okay, of course. Yep. Yeah.
And
it was either religion or money.
Yeah, right. And maybe it was a little bit of both,
right.
but religion certainly. He disowned her, and she said, "Oh, okay." And they came out here and bought a homestead out on the creek, and around the turn of the century, they opened a boarding house, TC and Sedona.
When you say they came out here, where'd they come from?
Missouri.
Okay. Oh, good.
And they end up down by the creek, about where Los Abregados is today, and they opened a boarding house down there, which is the first boarding house in the area. And you think about, why is there a boarding house in Sedona at the turn of the century? There are no railroads through here. There's no main roads that come through here. There aren't business people coming who need a place to stay.
Right.
The main industry is agriculture, so it's people sending stuff out, not bringing stuff in. So what's the reason for a boarding house at the turn of the century? It's our beautiful red rocks.
Oh, cool.
Right.
So,
and so
they
you can kind of point to that as
that point.
You can kind of point to that as the beginning of the tourist industry and the lodging industry here. And there's a direct line you can draw from the Schneble boarding house through the rise of the roadside motels and hotels in the 20s and 30s, and the bigger hotels in the middle part of the century, into the timeshares, and dare I say it, down to the short-term rentals, Airbnbs. But there's a direct line between that history and what's going on today in the community and the discussions around short-term rentals. And
oh yeah, do you know if there was any sort of Wild West element in Sedona at that time, or did Sedona kind of avoid that?
Well, I've never come across anything with like shootouts like the OK Corral or anything like that, to my knowledge.
Except in the movies.
Except in the movies, which we can talk about that all the time in the movies.
Right.
Doc Holliday and Wyatt Earp didn't come through here.
Exactly.
It wasn't part of their vendetta ride to take a side trip to Sedona or anything. But certainly with that agricultural history, lots of cowboys in the area. There were great grazing grounds, in the West Sedona area where we are today, which made for great winter grazing for cattle. And then in the summertime, you could run them up the rim up Schneble Hill Road, which wasn't in any better condition than it is now, or other trails, and get them to the top of the rim.
Is the mayor listening? Is Mayor Jablon listening?
They'd summer up on top of the rim, and then in the fall you bring them back down. So definitely need cowboys for all that. So there's certainly some around. And then, of course, you mentioned the movies already, and we can get deeper into this, but some of the local cowboys would stand in as cowboys in the movies, in the Westerns that were shot here.
Oh, even in the 40s and 50s?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yep.
Yeah, that's great. I hadn't thought about asking you this, but since we started talking about that kind of history, it occurred to me. So I live in the village of Oak Creek on Gunsight Hills Drive, which I wasn't crazy about because I'm not a gun person, but I knew I wasn't going to be able to get the town to change the name of the street. But apparently it's called Gunsight Hills Drive because I have a view from my house to that part, those rocks, where there's a little crevice between between the rocks. And apparently the reason it's called that is because that was apparently a gun site for, and I don't know if it was a Cowboys and Indians thing way back, or it may have been a Civil War period thing. I'm not sure. Do you know anything about that?
I don't know about that specifically. I can
look
look into that.
Into.
Something to look into.
Yeah.
And that's another great thing about local history is there's always something more to dig into. And some in a venue like this, somebody can bring up something. It's like, you know what? I got to go check that out. I will say, I wouldn't say there's a cowboys and Indians history here in the way that like is kind of really romanticized in movies and that kind of thing. But there certainly is Native history here going back, over 10,000 years. And I'm sure your guests
from the
Archaeology Center got into that
absolutely
and did a much better job covering that than I could. But I will say, the origin story of Sedona is always told about like J.J. Thompson just shows up in Oak Creek Canyon and discovers, gardens growing by the creek. And that was one of those things that didn't really sit well with me. I was like, no, I don't think he didn't discover anything. Right. And so I've spent a lot of time digging into that story too. And it goes back and again, I don't want to cover a lot of ground that the archaeology folks did, but in the 1870s, the Army put Camp Verde in, just south of here, and its main purpose was to control the local Indian population, which was Yavapai and Apache peoples. Right. And of course, that leads to lots of armed conflict and violent conflict, and ultimately the Army says, okay, we're done here, and they round up all the Yavapai and Apache peoples and literally walk them to the San Carlos Reservation, a couple hundred miles away, and hundreds die, and it's just an awful thing. Is that the
Trail of Tears thing?
I mean, it's kind of like the Trail of Tears. It's our own horrific local version of that, and the Yavapai Apache Nation refers to it as the Exodus.
Oh, wow.
And of course, not everybody was going to do that, right? And so several members of the local tribes escaped into Oak Creek Canyon because there's plenty of water, plenty of places to grow food, plenty of places to hide out. And in 1876, in August of 1876, General Crook in Camp Verde sends out a troop of cavalry into Oak Creek Canyon and says, take care of this, right? And they come across a tribe and they murder as many of the men as they can. They capture as many of the women and children as they can, but some get away. And so they spend some time searching. They go back to the Camp Verde and say, we're going to have to go back. And so a month later in September, an Indian scout named Al Sieber takes a troop of Apache scouts into Oak Creek Canyon to finish the job, to put it crassly. And that's what they do. They murder the remaining men that they find. They capture the women and children. They head back to Camp Verde. And who happens to be at Camp Verde but a guy by the name of J.J. Thompson, who's a trader with the Army. And he hears, Al Sieber's cleared the canyon. And so he rides one day over to Page Springs and gets his buddy Frank Koppel. And the next day, the two of them ride up into Oak Creek Canyon. And that's where and when J.J. Thompson stakes his claim of squatters' rights, where those people had previously been living, literally just a couple days before.
Wow.
And he names it Indian Gardens. That's true.
So when you say digging into, to use an archaeological term,
sure.
How do you go about that? I mean, to get this kind of information now about stuff from 150 years ago, where is that information curated from?
Sure. So with that one in particular, we had the memories and the written record from the Thompson family, and they kind of tell the story one way, and it's like, okay, that's kind of where they're coming from. But the next question is, how can I validate any of this? And that's digging into contemporary records and firsthand accounts, right? And so a lot of the expeditions that went out of Camp Verde were recorded in the Prescott newspaper, which was the Daily Miner at the time. And
you were able to get into the archives?
Able to dig into those. There's a fantastic resource out there for any researchers, genealogists who don't know. There's a website called the Arizona Memory Project. It's run by the Arizona Historical Records Advisory Board and the State Library. And historical institutions across the state digitize and upload to Arizona Memory Project the holdings in their museum collections, archives, that kind of thing. And so, new stuff is always being added to these repositories, and there are other things like newspaper. That's a free one. Arizona Memory Project's free. Newspapers.com and Ancestry.com.
Sure.
You've got to have a subscription, but there's amazing information there. And so what you do is you try to find those primary documents, going back to your grade school days, remembering primary versus secondary documents. So you try to find as much primary documentation as you can, and then the secondary documentation to back it up. And so that's what I did with the Thompsons. I went through and I pieced all that together through contemporaneous accounts and other people's memoirs and diaries from the time, that kind of thing. And once it all started to come together, the Thompson family story picks up with, Granddad heard that Al Sieber had gone on this raid, and it's like, okay, this is where they connect.
Wow.
Right. Yeah. And so you're able to say, okay, this is how it pieces all together.
Yeah, that's fascinating when you can learn that stuff this late in the game.
Yeah,
it's tremendous. So we're going to take a little break, and then when we come back, we're going to talk about a lot of the upcoming programs that you have at the museum, because I want to give your operation a plug since you're the sponsor this month.
Love it.
So the Sedona Heritage Museum, which invites visitors from Sedona across the country and around the world to explore the unique history of Red Rock Country. At the Sedona Heritage Museum, you can dive into exhibits about local art history, pop culture, film history, as we just talked about, and so much more. The Sedona Heritage Museum is located in Jordan Historical Park, 735 Jordan Road in Uptown Sedona, and it is open daily from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. For more information about the museum and all its programs, call 928-282-7038. That's 928-282-7038, or visit sedonamuseum.org. And if you happen to be within 15 minutes of the radio station, you can come over and grab Nate before he leaves to go back to work today, or whatever you're going to do on a Saturday morning. So anyway, thank you for being a sponsor this month. It's great having you.
Our pleasure.
All right. So getting back, now let's dive into some of the specific things that you're doing at the museum. Tell our listeners about two of the newest exhibits, especially the one about the artwork and life of Helen Jordan, one of the pioneers of Sedona. And then I'm just going to talk a little bit about the McDonald's teal arches, because that's actually one of the reasons I moved here.
That's a great story. So yeah, we'll touch on that for sure.
Yeah.
So the most recent exhibit that we open at the museum is called I Paint, the life and artwork of Helen Jordan. And the title's taken from an interview that Helen Jordan did in the I can't remember when, but towards the end of her career, with the Red Rock News. And they said, do you consider yourself an artist? And she says, oh, I've thought about that a lot over the years. And she said, I don't know if I'd consider myself an artist. I paint.
Nice.
And so, but to give her some credit, she is she was a very talented artist. She and her husband, George Jordan, ran a big orchard operation in what's today Uptown Sedona. Their fruit packing shed is what's today the Sedona Art Barn. It's part of the Sedona Art Center.
Okay.
And in the late 50s, they had to retire. George suffered from arthritis and just couldn't do the work anymore. And as she got older, Helen had kind of gotten back in touch with her artistic side. She said she grew up doodling in the sides of notebooks and that kind of thing, but got away from it as she started a family and did the work of the orchard and all that kind of thing. And so she starts getting back into it, and they sell the property. Ironically, 3 years after they sell it, it's purchased by the Sedona Art Center to become the Art Barn.
Right.
And she would go and she'd take lessons from anybody she could. And so when you look at the width and breadth of her work, she doesn't stick to one media. She doesn't stick to one genre. She did still lifes. She did portraits. She did, in the exhibit, there's a wonderful Impressionist painting that's of Jerome. She did landscapes. She did them in oils, watercolors, pastels, charcoal sketches. So you'll see all that in the exhibit.
Was she also a clothes designer in some way? I thought I noticed something.
No.
No, okay.
No. She was not, but she was definitely very creative. And then she ended up teaching at the art center too, in the art farm.
So at the time this was all going on, when she was really diving into her art at that point, was Sedona had Sedona already become a thriving art community of a lot of different artists, or did that happen later?
Yeah, I mean, Sedona has always been an inspiration for artists. I mean, thousands of years, right? You can look at rock art, and then you get into painters and photographers and all that. Max Ernst, one of the fathers of the Surrealist movement and the Dada movement within Surrealism. He and his wife Dorothea Tanning, who's also a fantastic Surrealist artist in her own right, they had a studio here in Sedona in the 40s, and so. Yeah, I mean, there's a long history of Sedona as a thriving art community.
Yeah, like it is now. So the first time I came here with my wife and daughter was, I believe, 2002. It was on the back end of a skiing vacation in Colorado, and I fell in love with it immediately. And I'm a dyed-in-the-wool New Yorker. Never thought I could live anyplace else but New York, but as soon as we came here, I just saw the Red Rocks and said, well, if I ever do live anyplace else, this would be awesome. But the thing that impressed me as much as anything else was seeing the teal arches at McDonald's. And, and then eventually I learned the reason they had to be teal was because the city made them, agree to the color scheme of the town. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that goes back into the 1970s, actually. In the 1970s, the group that's still around today called Keep Sedona Beautiful was organized, and they had two main missions when they organized. One was the litter lifter program to clean up the highways. They still do that today. You'll see signs, litter lifters ahead, whatever, and then you'll see them out there picking up trash. Which is a wonderful community benefit. And the other one was to clean up the signage around town.
Right.
If you look at pictures from the 70s and the 80s, every business in Uptown had like 6, 7, 8 signs. Some were on the sidewalks, some were neon, some were big, some were real obnoxious. Yeah. There were big billboards along 179 and 89A. That blocked views, and Keep Sedona Beautiful was like, we need a sign ordinance. We got to get a handle on this. Yeah. And there was no city of Sedona at the time. The city wasn't incorporated until 1988. And so it was really Keep Sedona Beautiful and local residents working with the county to get this sign ordinance and get it all cleaned up. And, that proved successful. And about the time that they're becoming a success with this, the city is incorporated in 1988. And shortly after that is when McDonald says, hey, we want to build a restaurant in Sedona. And so Keep Sedona Beautiful in the city said, great, but you're not putting a 40-foot tall sign here. You're not putting golden arches here. It's got to be a color that matches kind of a Southwestern color palette. And I was talking about a year ago with the person who was head of the planning department in Sedona, J.J. O'Brien, and he said, "Oh, you got to know something. It's not teal, it's turquoise."
They're kind of close.
They're kind of close.
I love both colors, by the way.
Yeah. But he was very clear. It's turquoise. But yeah, and interestingly, it's not actually in the city land development codes that it has to be, but it was that pressure, that community pressure that, and I think that's what makes it a really incredible story is, this is a massive corporation with all the resources in the world and probably the most recognizable brand on the planet. Right. And, the people of Sedona say, if you're going to come here, you got to change your branding for us.
Yeah, and I'm sure they don't mind the fact that every single tourist goes over to that McDonald's and takes pictures.
Oh yeah,
it's near those arches.
It's a thing now, right?
Yeah. Do you ever think they might have considered doing it like a rust color to like match the rocks? Because that could have been the other choice. I guess.
It could have been, I would think. Yeah. It would have been a logical choice.
Yeah, that's a fascinating thing. Anyway, so you've had a program at the museum called Our Town Sedona, Only We're Dead, the musical. And I've got two dear friends in that production that I've made since I moved here 3 years ago, and that's Chandra Jefferson and Dev Ross. Mm-hmm. So I'm really interested to hear about how that program came together, who spearheaded it, who came to a meeting and said, "I see dead people." Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, the original cemetery programs that the museum did out at Shoreman Red Rock Cemetery and over at Cook Cedar Glades Cemetery, mm-hmm. Those are both owned by the museum, was really kind of an effort to I believe it was born out of the pandemic, where it's like, okay, we got to do stuff outside.
Oh, right,
and
right.
Dev and Chandra, as you mentioned, just super creative people,
right.
And they came up with this program. And being creatives, they're not content to sit on something. Mm-hmm. They're like, what else can we do? So last year, came up with the idea for Our Town Sedona, the musical. Only we're dead, right?
Right.
And it was playing off this idea of the cemetery. And so it was, the characters were based on people who were buried.
Historical figures
buried in both those cemeteries. And added some music, old popular songs, old folk songs, that kind of thing that people could sing along to. And it was really great because, it was all based on historical research and historical figures. So it was really sharing our history in a very different,
it's a great
but really creative way.
Yeah, and it's good that you kept it going post pandemic, right? I mean,
and this year's iteration is going to be a little bit different. I don't want to say too much because it still is in development, but keep an eye out for what Dev and Chandra are working on. I have a little secret for you. Last year when this was coming up, I do a little singing. I did some singing back in New York. And I've worked with Chandra and Dev on one of their murder mysteries that they do on the train. And I got a message from Dev one day and said, excuse me, can you play a dead person from Sedona's history in this thing at the museum? And I was really busy at the time, so I couldn't do it. And I said, I think you probably need like a more experienced actor for this. But I came this close to being... You could have been the star of the show.
I could have been in there. I think they wanted me to play the doctor. But I'm sure they found somebody really good that did a better job than I would have. Anyway, that's...
Well, I should shout out the actors and actresses who play these because most of them are trained actors and actresses, and Sedona being, as we mentioned, an arts community. There's plenty of them around, and they do a really good job, and that's part of what makes the show really work is the dedication that these professional actors and actresses put into it.
What's the response of the people that come to see it?
Oh, they loved it.
Yeah.
It was, and switching it up to the musical last year and everything. It was.
Well, I'm not surprised popular. That it became a musical with Chandra and Dev involved, right? Being that they're both great at that.
Yeah.
So here's another thing. So scanning your online events calendar, mm-hmm. It appears that September is pretty much, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Arts and Crafts Month, where on Mondays you have the Red Rock Quilters on September 9th, the Verde Valley Wood Carvers on September 16th, and the Verde Valley Weavers and Spinners on September 23rd, all from 11 to 1. Tell us about that program.
Yeah, we run those. It's a program called Mondays at the Museum,
mm-hmm.
and every Monday in the more comfortable weather months, we should say, from like September.
When everybody's back in town.
Yeah, through at least April and into May if some want to do it, but it starts getting warm. But every Monday we've got different crafters and artisans doing something with their craft. So quilters and woodworkers and all that stuff. And it's a free program. People can drop in, check it out. It's really neat. You get to interact with them. You know, if you're an aspiring woodworker, for instance, you drop in that day and say, "Hey, I've been working on this. Can you help me? Can you give me
and all these
tips
groups,
or tricks
or
or whatever?"
These groups have their programs in their own spaces, but they're just bringing it over to the museum.
On those Mondays at the museum, they bring it.
That's
bring
great.
it to Sedona Heritage Museum and share what they do.
That's awesome. So
yeah, it's a great program.
Yeah. So I assume, tell us about anything else we left out, and also I assume that as an executive director of a museum, you've got ideas about like things you want to do in the future, programs. I don't know how much you want to give away, but if you have kind of like a wish list of what you might want to do going forward.
Sure. I mean, one of the things that we're big on over at the museum is collaboration and partnerships. And so to that end, we're actually working with the Sedona Arts Center in the month of September. We're running a joint show at both sites of the artwork of Myrna Harrison. Myrna Harrison is an artist based in the Valley, but she does a lot of landscapes. She's certainly been inspired by Sedona to make artwork. She's got a really unique style, and she's shown in the galleries up here dozens of times. So it's kind of bringing some of her artwork back and doing a little show dedicated to that, and show and sale. And we're going to do a grand opening event at both locations. We have a trolley that'll shuttle people back and forth between the Art Center and the museum on September 6th from 4 to 6.
That's great.
Yeah. So come on out, check out some artwork, and you know, it'll all be for sale, so people can purchase and take some of it home. Yeah.
You might not want to like get too in the weeds on this, but in terms of how the museum is continually funded, do you get grants? Do people in the community donate money? Do you have fundraisers? How do you get keep it going financially?
All of the above.
Yeah. Okay.
And we do have to give credit to the city of Sedona. You know, city of Sedona has a handful of nonprofits in the community that they have service provider contracts with, and we're one of them. And so we have a contract with the city to operate the museum. The museum, actually, Sedona Heritage Museum, all the buildings in Jordan Historical Park, the park and most of the buildings except for the telegraph office actually belong to the city of Sedona, and so we're under contract with them to run it as a museum. And so that's a fair amount of funding that we get from that too.
How much do you do working on the physical space? Is that a constant state of upgrading, or do you even need to?
That's really nice. Is we do have that partnership with the city, and so we work with them to upgrade the buildings as needed, and so that's a really wonderful working partnership with them.
That's great. One of the things I wanted to ask you when Helen Jordan came up was when did Jordan Road become established? I assume it's named after her. And her husband.
Actually, there's a great story attached to the Jordans.
Oh, great.
So the Jordans actually were orchardists over on the other side of the Verde Valley, over in the Clarkdale area. Okay. And in the 1920s, United Verde Copper Mine built a gigantic smelter in Clarkdale. 400 or 500 foot tall smokestacks that just belched out noxious chemicals and all sorts of stuff. And in the 1920s, we didn't know something we know now, which is that's very poisonous and will kill things, right? And so the Jordans and several other orchardists in the area lost all their trees and lost all their crops. And they pointed to the smelter and said, that's the reason. And so they actually filed one of the first environmental lawsuits in American history against United Verde, saying that your smelter is producing all these chemicals that are killing our trees. And they won. And United Verde, of course, appealed it all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said...
It became a Supreme Court case.
It did not. The Supreme Court said, no, we
find
that you are at fault.
Okay.
And that the lower courts are right, and No, that's...
Wish they would do that a little more now, but that's getting into another area.
Yeah, we don't need to get into the Supreme Court today. That's a whole nother show. Right. So rather than, they took their winnings, and rather than replanting in the shadow of the smelter, they came across the valley and bought land down where George and Helen ran their orchards in Uptown, and then later acquired land a little bit further from the creek, where the Jordan Historical Park is today. And George's brother, Walter, and his wife, Ruth, actually ran a 60-acre orchard there.
Okay.
And so the buildings that make up the Sedona Heritage Museum today are the Walter and Ruth Jordan home, their original 1931 packing shed, and then their 1947 fruit packing shed, which is the big red stone building.
Right.
And so they started with just a one-room cabin and expanded and ran those orchards there. The neighborhood around it is where the orchards were, and those neighborhoods, of course, are very cleverly called Orchards and Orchards 2.
Yeah. So when they named that specific street Jordan Road, was there a method to the madness to pick that street?
It took you to the Jordan's orchard.
Okay.
Yep. And so that's where the name came from.
And did it always start like where that little circle is in Uptown?
Yep.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Yep.
So it wasn't just, hey, we need to name a street after these people.
Right. That's one of those ones where that describes where it went.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, if somebody was going to name a street after me, I'd want it to be like in my childhood. Although I don't think a street in the Bronx is going to be named after me. It's like,
you never know. Keep dreaming.
Right. So what else? What other stories you want to talk about in the time we have left? We have a few minutes left. What's anything else coming up that we didn't touch on?
Yeah, we've got our popular Red Rock Loop history tours are coming up October 2nd through 5th, and tickets should be available this week.
Is that a walking tour? Or
it's a bus tour, actually.
Nice.
We get a coach, and you ride on it, and we take you, for this one, we take you down the Loop Road, and we stop at historical sites all up and down the upper and lower Loop Roads.
How long does that go?
It's a 3-hour tour starting at the museum.
Like the Pink Jeep tours in Grand Canyon.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. And there's a lot of history out there that you will learn a ton from this tour. One of the stops is at the Shurman Homestead, and I hadn't mentioned the Shurmans.
Okay.
But the Shurmans were vintners and farmers out in the Red Rock Loop area, and they actually ran the state's first commercial winery and vineyard out there right off the Loop Road. And so one of the stops on the history tour is at the Shurman Homestead House, which is right there at the upper Red Rock Loop Road and Lloyd Lane. And that site speaks to that specific history of the Shurmans growing grapes in that area and running the first winery. Everybody's familiar with the idea of Prohibition. They learned about it in history class and that kind of thing. The interesting thing about Prohibition in Arizona is that Arizona went dry 5 years before the nation went dry. So the amendment went into place in 1920, but Arizona went dry in 1915. And
was that because you just had a lot of radical prohibitionists in the area?
Yeah, it was strong prohibition sentiment in Arizona and strong conservative sentiment.
All over the state or just in this neck of the woods?
All over the state, across the state. And so it goes dry in 1915, and Heinrich Shurman says, well, the heck with that. This is my living. And so he got pinched in 1915 for transporting, I think it was 4 50-gallon bottles or 50-gallon barrels of wine, and went to prison. And he was pardoned by the governor in 1917 because with the outbreak of World War I, his sons enlisted in the military and went off to fight, and there was no one left to run the farming operation.
Okay, so they cut him a break.
The governor pardoned him to go run the farming operation. They never went back to grapes. They never went back to wine. But interestingly, some of the family members kept some of the grapes going, just in case,
right,
you know.
Right.
And about 20 years ago, the good folks over at Page Spring Cellars took some of those clippings from those vines and resuscitated the old Shorman's Zinfandel grapes.
Really?
And
that's cool.
2 years ago, I think it was, they produced the first Shorman's Zinfandel that had been created in over 100 years.
Wow.
From those grapes.
I'm going to get some of that next time I go over to Page Springs. That's a really good
I don't know. Last year they didn't get any. They didn't get enough grapes to make
bottle
any.
anything.
And this year I've seen the grapes and they seem to be producing pretty good. So I'm hopeful they're able to make some this year.
Yeah. What else is on your wish list to have the museum do down the road? Do you have any big plans?
Yeah, I mean, I think
you need to start working on.
Yeah, one of the things that I want to do is make sure that the local community realizes that we're there for them too.
Right.
You know, obviously, the sheer number of tourists in town is, gonna make it so that the tourists butter our bread, so to speak. But I want to make sure that we're there for the locals too. And so part of that is a community day. Part of it is, I'd invite everybody to keep an eye out for changing exhibits. I recognize there's maybe some sentiment out there that it never changes. I went once, it was pretty cool, but I don't need to go back. You need to come back.
Yeah.
We're always doing new programs, always trying new things, always change. We're getting on a schedule where we're changing exhibits. So you're not going to want to miss that.
Do you get a really good feel for what the tourist traffic is at any given time, just based, without even looking at any data that the city has, but just based on your own experience of who's coming through? Can you tell, it's slow, like the tourist traffic is slow, no matter what the season is? You can tell?
You can tell.
Yeah.
Because, it's just, there are just so many in town that it's...
Right. What's your best season for tourism?
Spring's really good.
Yeah.
Fall's really good. Summer's rough.
For everybody.
Yeah, for everybody. We're not the only ones,
Yeah. Everybody leaves to go to a little bit cooler.
Yeah, I mean, like the locals who have second homes elsewhere are in cooler places. The tourists are not coming to Sedona as much. If you're coming from New York, this is not your dream time to come see Sedona, right? In the Red Rocks, because it's 100 degrees.
Do you guys have any relationships with museum people, like beyond the Verde Valley, like Phoenix, Tucson? Like, do you have any deals with them?
Absolutely, yeah. We're always looking to collaborate, and we're part of the Museum Association of Arizona, and so we participate in their professional development, their conferences, and make sure that we're part of the discussions there. I would love to see it, where we create some even stronger partnerships locally with some Verde Valley museums and see what we can do to drive visitation to one another.
Right.
Because, we're not competitors with one another. We're
sure,
partners.
Yeah.
And when...
It's the way the archaeological center works with other people. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I think people in Sedona should be really thankful that they have somebody like you that's so passionate and knowledgeable about keeping this stuff alive. I mean, history needs to be kept alive, and you're really giving a valuable service to the community. I just wanted to let you know that.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
That means a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And it's great hearing about you. So I really appreciate you being here. You told some great stories. It's been fun talking to you about all this stuff. Wish we could have gotten a little bit more into sports, but
next time.
But you're right. Next time. So I really want to thank my guest, Nate Meyers, Executive Director of the Sedona Heritage Museum, for joining me in the studio today and for his fascinating stories. And thanks to the museum for being our show sponsor for the month of August. As I said before, at the Sedona Heritage Museum, you can explore the unique history of Sedona and Red Rock Country. The Sedona Heritage Museum is located in Jordan Historical Park at 735 Jordan Road in Uptown Sedona, and it's open daily from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. For more information, call 928-282-7038. That's 928-282-7038, or visit sedonamuseum.org. Thanks, as always, to my tremendous producer in the booth, Ryan Thompson, who after the show, as always, will send me the audio that will transform this show into a podcast version of Sedona Life with Stephen Hanks that you can listen to anytime on Apple and Amazon Podcasts, YouTube, and Spotify. You can also email me with comments and questions to Stephen@mellowmountainradio.com, and you can find Sedona Life with Stephen Hanks on Facebook. Now, given that we're getting close to the home stretch of the Major League Baseball season and close to the start of the National Football League season, next Saturday we'll be again talking Arizona D-backs baseball and Arizona Cardinals football with Tyler Drake, the Cardinals beat writer for ArizonaSports.com, and who also co-hosts Arizona Sports Cardinals Corner podcast. And since I'm the big baseball nut, I'll chime in on the D-backs situation. And if you're into Democratic politics, whether local or national, I hope you'll turn into my other KAZM Mellow Mountain Radio show, The Patriotic Progressive, which airs every Saturday morning at 8 to 9 a.m. and is also live streamed on the station website and on the podcast platforms I mentioned earlier. But for now, I also want to tell you to have a great weekend. Thanks for listening to Red Rock Country's Radio Magazine. I really appreciate all you listening, and go to the Sedona Heritage Museum. It's a great opportunity to learn about not only the place where you may live now, but you can tell all your relatives to come to town and learn about this fascinating city. So thanks again for listening. Have a great week, everyone.